So let me just see if I can already see any of our attendees today. So not yet, but I look forward to your comments later. So as we are all aware, one of the most important issues in the fashion industry today is how to reduce its carbon footprint with very ambitious and challenging targets set in the Paris Agreement. And according to major organizations, forests are recognized as a vital pathway to decarbonization, besides other solutions such as sourcing low-impact materials, including man-made cellulosic fibers, paper and packaging, and rubber, certified to sustainable forest management standards, and also converting to green energy sources. According to the Textile Exchange Preferred Fiber and Materials Report of 2021, the market share of certified man-made cellulosic fibers has increased and now accounts for over 55%. But there is still a long way to go, and collective action is needed to increase that percentage and help protect the world's forests. PFC recently launched this white paper on the fashion industry, forests, and climate change, which we'll show right here on screen, to which there were so many positive responses, but also questions on what tools and resources there are to move forward on this journey. You can easily download the paper through the QR code in the slide if you haven't had a chance to read it yet. So we thought it would be really valuable to host this webinar and bring together diverse stakeholders to share their insights and also their experience on this topic. Therefore, it's my great pleasure to welcome our panel of today. We will be hearing from climate and forestry experts, industry organizations providing tools and resources, and also a brand perspective. I, for one, am really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and learning from you, as I'm sure our audience is as well. So without further ado, we welcome with us today, Leonie Meyer, Ana Belén Noriega, Bravo, Shelja Dubé, Andres Fernandez, and Joel Mertens. So to our panel, could I please ask you to briefly introduce yourselves and your organizations? So I'll start with Leonie.
Sure, thanks so much, Deepa. It's a real pleasure to be here. So my name is Leonie Meyer. I work as an Associate Economic Affairs Officer at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. We like to call it UNECE, just for the shorter name. It's one of the 5 regional organizations of the UN. Our overall aim is really to promote the regional implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. But the UNECE region doesn't only cover Europe, so it's a bit misleading in its name. We also work in North America, Caucasus, Central Asia, and Russia. And the region is actually really important when it comes to forests, as it contains more than 40% of the global forest area, 85% of certified forest area, and 60% of industrial roundwood production. And this is why we have the forestry and timber section where I work, which is a joint section between UNECE and FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. So what does the forestry and timber section do? We cover a lot of activities ranging from data collection, monitoring, analysis of data, policy dialogue, of course, communications, and also capacity building. And all of this in the area of sustainable forest management and sustainable wood products. Hence also looking at textiles from a forestry perspective. And that's where our Forest for Fashion initiative comes in. It's one of our communications and engagement campaigns, where we've also partnered with PFC and other organizations. And we really aim to highlight the role that forest products and forests in general can play in contributing towards the sustainable fashion sector. And we have plans now, it's kind of still in the pipeline, but we want to expand this engagement to the world of sports. So there might be some news coming on that next week. That's for me, thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonie. Anna?
I'm sorry, Anna, I think you need to unmute yourself. I'm sorry. Good afternoon to everyone. Sorry for this. I'm Ana Belén Noriega. I'm Secretary General of PFC Spain. I'm a forest engineer and MBA in project management. I work as Secretary General of PFC Spain since 2006, and is the association to promote sustainable forest development through forest certification at the national level. It's where I work. I'm speaking today on behalf of PFC International. PFC is an international non-profit, non-governmental organization dedicated to promoting sustainable forest management worldwide. It was created by small family forest owners in 1999, and we have grown to become the world's largest forest certification system. We are close to 65% of certified forest area globally is certified to PFC standards. And our mission is to continue unlocking and building on the full contribution of forests for a sustainable world. At the global level, we have some 330 million of certified forests, and over 2,000 companies have obtained the chain of custody certification from PFC. In Spain, for instance, we have 2.5 million of certified forests and over 1,600 certified companies. One of them, for instance, is Textil Santanderina, which is the first fabric producer with PFC certification worldwide. They are vertical producers. They do from the base to the garment. And regarding fashion, PFC certification gives fashion brands and retailers the assurance that they are using wood-based fibers that have been sourced sustainably from well-managed forests. And these forests are playing their part in tackling climate change. By means of PFC certification, the fashion industry can provide evidence that companies are not contributing to deforestation or illegal logging, nor intensifying the accompanying social and environmental problems. Through the campaign Fashion Change, Forest Stay, the one we are talking about today, PFC is helping the textile sector to promote sustainable forest management and contribute to climate change mitigation. In previous times, we collaborate, as Leonie said, with Forest for Fashion, which is a great initiative from UNECE.
Thank you, Anna. And over to you, Shelja.
Oh, thank you, Deepa. I'm delighted to be here. I am Shelja Dubé, and I lead the Institute of Positive Fashion work at the British Fashion Council. And under that role, I also direct the Circular Fashion Ecosystem project that I hope to talk about through this webinar as well. But what that means is I'm essentially responsible for the strategy and the delivery of the British Fashion Council's commitment to help guide UK fashion's climate action agenda. The Institute of Positive Fashion was launched by the BFC last year. It evolved out of a focus on positive fashion and sustainability in our industry that the British Fashion Council started well over 7 years ago. Excuse me. And we've set up the IPF across 3 different pillars. So the environment, people, community, and craftsmanship, as different pathways to enable this future vision of our industry to be realized. And since it launched last year, we've been quite focused on how to contribute to pushing forward the action of a regenerative fashion economy in the UK, but also, and by virtue of doing so in the UK, across the global scene as well. On a personal level, before I joined the BFC, I was leading the responsible retail agenda at Accenture Retail UK, and that was really focused on the intersection of business sustainability, but in fashion and the wider retail sectors as well. And I just wanted to briefly touch upon the British Fashion Council. For those who may not be very familiar with what we do, we are the industry body for designer businesses in the UK and are a not-for-profit. But our key role is really to oversee, to support and advise on key issues affecting our industry in the UK, but also advise on opportunities facing the British designer industry as well. We have many amazing designers in our community who are sustainability natives and really making significant moves forward across this agenda, especially some of the ones that you've just spoken about as well, Anna. And part of our role is to shine a light on the British fashion scene and the British fashion designer talent really on the global stage. And we do this through mechanisms such as London Fashion Week and the Fashion Awards too. What people don't probably realize is we also play a crucial role in liaising with government. We speak regularly to various government organizations and departments to present issues facing the industry, to seek their support that's needed to help guide our industry in the right direction. So just to bring that to life, for example, what does the new UK-EU trade agreement mean to designer businesses in the UK? So we've gone through that and presented back some challenges and opportunities that the government can take into account if they draft a further iteration of that.
Okay, thank you so much. Lovely to have you with us today. And next, Joelle, maybe you could introduce yourself as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Joelle. I work at the Sustainable Apparel Coalition on our HIG product tools. So the Sustainable Apparel Coalition represents about 40% of the apparel and footwear industry, including brands, manufacturers, academics, NGOs. It's a big tent coalition really driving towards lower impact. How do we as a collective lower our impact, recognizing that really we can't do it alone. We're going to need to work together to really see things scale at the level that they need to. Within the HIG product or within the HIG Index, which is the suite of tools that the Sustainable Apparel Coalition has developed with our members, we have brand tools which look at the practices that a brand has in place to be more sustainable, including sourcing practices, how they work with their supply chain partners, what risks are they managing. There's facility tools really looking at within the facilities how they're operating from an environmental or social lens, and primarily that started in the tier 1 space, so in cut and sew, but moving down the supply chain, we do have actually man-made cellulosic producers also using the facility environment module to track their performance, and then the product tools, which is the area that I'm responsible for, which is being able to take all those practices and how do we convert that into environmental impact, and the framework that we have utilizes life cycle assessment, which is one of the more common frameworks to get to get to impact. So if you're doing carbon reporting, it's basically a one dimension of LCA, life cycle assessment. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here and talking more about how that relates to forests.
Well, we're looking forward to that, Joelle, and a warm welcome as well to Andres.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you for having me. Brief introduction. I'm Andres Fernandez. I'm in charge of sourcing and sustainability in Mango. For those who may not know the brand, we are based in Spain. We are the second largest fashion retailer and exporter in Spain, behind the Inditex Group, which are #1 in the whole world. We are roughly a 2,000 million euro annual turnover company. Based in Barcelona, and among other things, being in charge of sustainability, I am responsible for laying down our ESG strategy and keeping it up to date, and more and more every day, growing it to more ambitious targets, and transforming the company and the way we do business.
Thanks, Andres. We're really looking forward to hearing from you as a brand as well. I'll have a really quick look at the chat. So who do we have here today? Welcome, Benjamin. Great to see you as well. Anna and Forest. So we have Laura from SGT who says that forests to me means peaceful living ecosystems that we need to protect. So completely echo that sentiment as well. So keep them coming. Thank you so much. So I think what we'll do now is we will start with some questions for our panel. Leonie, I'll start with you. Leonie, what role do forests play in global climate change mitigation, and why is this information important for fashion?
Thank you, Deepa. Well, where do I start? I think we all know that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires really far-reaching and rapid transformation in a lot of systems, so energy, land, industry, transport, cities, which we also work on. And forests can remove carbon from the atmosphere cost effectively. I think most of us know that as well, with multiple co-benefits. While at the same time, climate change can force large releases of carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions. So I think this is the kind of two major dynamics that are at play when we talk about global climate change mitigation and forests. Yeah, Julia's putting up the slide. So forests are both carbon sinks and carbon sources. That's what I wanted to demonstrate here. As sinks, forests and soils store approximately 2.6 billion tons of CO2, which is about 1/3 of the CO2 released from burning fossil fuels. So in sustainably managed forests, and I'm sure we hear more about that from Anna as well, the amount of carbon that can be released as a result of harvesting is equal to or smaller than the amount taken from the atmosphere. However, forests can also be sources of GHG emissions. As said, you see here it's around 12% of global carbon emissions or global greenhouse gas emissions actually that come from deforestation and forest degradation. And we recently had an event on wildfires in the Boreal region. And it's quite alarming to see that trend. So the amounts of carbon released from these disturbances. On top of that, climate change affects also the health and distribution and composition of forests. With evolutions in rainfall and temperature, they can have either damaging, but actually also beneficial impacts on forest health and productivity, which is super complex to predict. So depending on circumstances, climate change will either reduce or increase carbon sequestration into forests, which causes uncertainty about the extent to which the world's forests will be able to contribute to climate change mitigation in the long term. However, what we know also, and PLC knows that really well as well, is that forest management activities have the potential to influence carbon sequestration by stimulating certain processes and mitigating impacts of negative factors. When assessing forest potential for climate change mitigation, overall, I think it's really crucial to see the bigger picture. So any mitigation actions, and that also includes, for example, offsetting measures, and tree planting, and so on. All of that must take into consideration sustainable development, poverty eradication, the rights of indigenous and local communities, conservation of biodiversity, and all the other environmental benefits of forests, also such as air and water. So it's really important to have that kind of holistic view when talking and thinking about how forests can contribute. If you are interested, as some of you might be, in learning more about these mechanisms, we're releasing a really big study, one of our flagship studies actually end of November. It's called Forest Sector Outlook Study, where we look at the impact of climate change on forests and also possible management and policy implications. And there's also a short chapter on textiles. So why is all of this important for fashion? Well, harvesting trees releases part of the carbon into the atmosphere, but another part remains stored in wood products, where the lifespan may vary from days to centuries, really. Looking at wood construction, for example, there, of course, it's very, very long-lived. So using wood to replace energy-intensive materials, especially in construction, like concrete and steel, but also plastics, which we have with polyester and synthetics and textiles, could play a significant part in limiting or reducing emissions from fossil fuel sources. Of course, we also know that the fashion sector is in itself a significant contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and the production of oil-based non-renewable fibers play an important part, although not the only one. I mean, the use phase, for example, is also very, very significant. But there's generally a need to address climate change through the fashion supply chain. So that's why the two have, you know, a very clear link. So I think the key takeaway that I want to bring across here in order to answer your question is that forests can make an important contribution towards net negative emissions, but they cannot be the only solution because also of how climate change influences them. So we can only really meet the Paris goals with rapid and immediate reductions in fossil fuel use. And I think also talking to the fashion community today, that the creativity and beauty of fashion should really be mobilized for climate positivity. So like creating an environmental benefit by removing additional carbon from the atmosphere, but also looking at all the other important aspects, you know, that tie into forests, so communities, biodiversity, and so on. I think I'll leave it here. We have a lot of questions to cover.
No, but I mean, those were all very, very valuable insights. Thank you. And another question, we know that materials account for the largest share of a garment's environmental impact. So what do you think can be done to incentivize the use of more sustainable materials?
Well, I think, I mean, there's a lot of ways. I think importantly is countering greenwashing. I think that it's still quite a big aspect we have to deal with. Because clothes are produced very far away, consumers, they need to really be able to trust the claims made by brands. So authentication from third parties and certification is important. I mean, forestry has a really long history of certification. So again, it's interesting and great actually to see PFC engaged in this topic and brands taking it up and being interested. Also, barring definitions are not really helpful, like especially when words are not followed by action. So, I mean, social and environmental problems cannot really be tackled by brands alone selling sustainable and eco fashion. I think we know that, and I think we have to, like, you know, take that on and translate that into implementing circular practices, which again is a huge task that requires, you know, beyond brands, government regulations, standards in areas such as design, waste management, recycling infrastructure. So yeah, we can't just, you know, say brands can do it all by themselves, and it's really important to also bring in the investment community willing to finance this transition and changing business practices. And I think the UN can actually help here also by working directly with governments on that to find the right regulatory frameworks, establishing platforms for dialogue on best practices, and engaging relevant actors from different stakeholder groups. And we are doing that also already through the UN Alliance for Sustainable Fashion, which was created to kind of coordinate more internally amongst UN agencies, but really with the aim to figure out how we can leverage these platforms, mainly for member states, to influence, you know, regulatory processes. And secondly, and I think that's tied to greenwashing as well, and also probably we hear a bit more about that from the work that the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is doing on LCAs. It's important to understand sustainable materials and improve the data on environmental and social impacts. I mean, we see a lot of, or I notice a lot of brands selling recycled polyester, for example. but of course, one of the problems with, for example, microfibers is not really tackled if you recycle it. So reusing is good, reusing materials, but yeah, I think there's a lot of misleading kind of actions that are not really moving us forward. So there's really, I think, a need for a paradigm shift, also in moving away from all forms of plastics. And coming back to the climate positivity that I mentioned before, I think at scale, this really means using materials that are not just biodegradable, but compostable, that come from renewable resources and are produced with renewable energy. So yeah, as a derivative of wood pulp and other natural plant materials, MMCFs can play an important role here. But again, also only with certification and traceability along the entire value chain, which is really key. So yeah, in a nutshell, I think with a couple of keywords to answer your question, incentivize the use of better materials through transparency, traceability, data, and really scaling up circularity through partnerships and enabling regulatory frameworks. Complicated.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Great insights, Leonie. I think everybody needs to hear all of this. So Anna, I would love to move on to you. So I think one of the first things I'd like to ask you is, how do PFC forestry standards support the climate contribution of forests? And it would be great if you could share some examples of PS3 forestry projects with us aimed at climate change mitigation.
Thank you, Deepa. Yeah, you can hear me?
I can.
Well, I must say that I'm really proud of being part of this alliance, PFC Alliance, because I must say that my personal history is writing down in big international processes as consultant for the Ministry of Environment of my country, writing down things, writing down criteria, indicators in international pan-European processes, and so on, FAO, UNECE, all these international multilateral processes. And when suddenly in 2006 I started with PFC, it was like, all right, now put it on the floor, do it, and now do it. And it was like, wow, it was a challenge, but it was a real good challenge. By PFC, I know we have 140 criteria to safeguard forests, so it's a large number of criteria, and we are doing this in 49 countries that have they have implemented down in their own forests. And by doing this, we can help to safeguard the capacity of forests to capture and store carbon, which is something which is very important now and in the medium and long term. And I can also think about things, not only the part of the environmental part, but also the social and the governance, the ESG of the forest. We also undertake these kind of things related to issues related to gender and social issues are really important in PFC, which makes it greater. But also we protect forests from illegal logging and deforestation and degradation, and we prevent conversions. We will never undertake this kind of practices. And also we want to maintain the capability of forests to produce a big range of wood and non-wood forest products, and also implement afforestation, reforestation, and other tree planting activities, which are really important to improve and restore the forest ecology. I believe that forests are at the heart of the society action to combat the climate change and its impacts. As carbon sinks, trees capture and store carbon, removing significant volumes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But to ensure that forests reach their full potential as a climate change solution, they must be managed sustainably, and that's our part. PFC certified forests are estimated to absorb 315 millions of tons of CO2 every year, equivalent to roughly 30% of annual emissions from the global fashion industry, or 85%, for instance, of the UK's emissions in 2018. One of example I will say is we PFC Spain as organization, we wanted to contribute more directly to climate change mitigation, not only by fostering the forest certification and forest planning and the good practices on the forest, on the Spanish forest, but also doing some action ahead. So we started a project of certified reforestation developed by ourselves, and we started in a damaged area affected by forest fires. So our aim was to heal the land, and then we started like a zero area with planting chestnut trees in 3.5 hectares. And we started by this very small area, but we thought that this might be a good contribution if we, as we were partnering with several organizations and companies. So, for instance, we were working together, collaborating with Sustainable Fashion Week Madrid. So we said, why don't we try to offset the CO2 emissions due to the event itself? So that's what we did. So we collaborate with them to offset all the impact of people coming to the Sustainable Fashion Week in Madrid. And also we did a second try with Casa Decor this year. It was Casa Decor Sostenible was the hashtag, because it was sustainable Casa Decor. Casa Decor is an interior design, trends and lifestyle platform. And if in both events, we offset the carbon footprint of the visitors. So that's a small contribution, but we talk about forests, we step into the environment of different people, no foresters. We don't want to talk about among us, among forest owners, among foresters. We want to speak to the society, and they love what we do in the forest. They love it. So we are really proud of this. And
that's
thankful.
Amazing. Thank you, Anna, for giving us your experiences on the ground. And I know there's also recently been a project with PFC Italy, where they partnered with Rete Clima and Ferragamo in a project to safeguard and protect the cork forest in Tuscany by supporting a project aimed at its certification and sustainable management. And with these PFC certification and management actions on the cork woods and on the surrounding forestry areas, new ecosystem services will be generated in favor of both local quality of territory and global climate mitigation. So referring to the ecosystem services of corkwood, the absorption of CO2 produced by this local action is equal to the amount of greenhouse gas emissions of the production of 500 pieces of the earth top handle bag by Ferragamo. And we will insert a link in the chat as well, so that you can read a little bit more about that project. Another question, Anna, that I'd like to ask you quickly is a little bit more about the climate benefits of sourcing PFC certified materials.
Well, for me, chain of, we have two kind of certifications. We have the SFM certification, Sustainable Forest Management, on the floor, for the forests, and then we have the chain of custody. That this means that every product that comes from this forest can be traced up to the final consumer, up to the consumers. But what is chain of custody for me? For me, it means the possibility of have bioeconomy, and we have the circular economy, because we have products that can be recycled coming from the forest. So they are really great for this new challenge we have. So I believe that the PFC chain of custody can really help to the industry, in this case to the textile industry. So I think that for the companies can help to meet the climate targets and support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I always like to explain that PFC is made from the heart of the of the forest and comes up and gives a solution and meets with top-down processes like SDG, sorry. So we have to meet in anywhere, but we are coming to meet all these requirements. I think it's a very good approach. And so companies can also respond to consumer demand and reduce the risk of reputational damage. I mean, the damage that has a company due to do a purchase from an unknown source that can be unsustainable or even illegal. It's really damage, can be a real damage for the company. So PFC chain of custody can ensure this, can ensure that it comes from a sustainably managed forest. And also you have the security of having the internationally recognized guidelines like ISO, ILO, for instance, for the fact of being a company being PFC certified has to comply with the 8 fundamental ILO conventions. And so we have the social things there, labor things there, in these PFC certified companies along the chain of custody, or IAF or UN processes that we also follow and we incorporate to our scheme. So I believe it's a big opportunity for the companies, and it's something that is a product that has been developed and has evolved during these last 20 years. And I think that we have a really good product in our hands, so and ready to use. I always say that PFC certification is like an iPhone, which is very complicated inside. We do it, but it's easy to use for the ones who have to use that. So I believe that it's a good tool for the textile industry.
Well, that's a great analogy. Thank you, Anna. So Shelja, I'd like to move to you next. Looking at the fashion industry, what are the views of the industry towards achieving carbon neutrality or even becoming carbon positive, including sustainable forestry, and how do you see the role of collaboration here?
Right, thank you. It's a really important question, and I just wanted to start by just saying I agree with everything Leonie and Dana have just said. There are so many points that resonate so well with industry and more broadly, and everything that you both have just mentioned. So thank you. It's a really important question, though, Deepa, as well, in this year of COP, obviously. So there's a huge focus on what we're calling fashion's path to net zero. And whilst we have the 2050 legal remit now enshrined in law, we all know that we must go much faster than 2050. Instead, how can we really determine the path to a 2030 roadmap very quickly to enable us all to stay within the 1.5 degree pathway? So I think there's definitely an awareness that drastic action is needed across the whole of the sector in many different ways. Business as usual is no longer viable. So I think the IPCC report has certainly sent a clear and sadly a very stark message around what needs to be done. And I guess the agreement there is that it's about mitigating and stopping resource extraction and an increasing focus on becoming nature positive, focus on biodiversity and nature restoration. So, of course, the role that our forests play has got a big part when it comes to planetary health and understanding the societal impacts of that as well across our global supply chains. But some of the thinking that is in the discussions that I've been in has been around the need to pioneer new materials. So picking up on the points, Anna, you just made around the circular economy there as well, and really to meet those climate targets. How can we think about business in a different way? How can we start using quote unquote waste from one industry and use it as an input into our industry? And also picking up on something that you said as well, Anna, around the consumer demand. How can we really pioneer new materials as brands and as the industry, but also create that citizen demand for new items, which will ultimately help towards the decarbonisation agenda. And a key way of doing that is through education and empowerment of the consumer. I think there's a lot of things that have been said and are being said in industry around, say, gigatons, for example, when it comes to carbon emissions. But what does that mean? If you're not familiar with those terms, how can it be something that is communicated in a way to help empower the whole public to really take action in our own individual ways? So I think there's probably a little bit more education that needs to be done. Being led by government would be incredibly helpful to enable everybody to have almost like just a carbon literacy and understanding across everywhere, starting from schools as well. So I guess more broadly, the industry's net zero journey is really how to do this in a holistic manner. And that's something Leonie, you mentioned as well, the holistic view needed, and some of the stakeholders that you had listed as well. That's absolutely industry's views that no one actor can really make a change by themselves. So how can we dissipate the typical, I guess, orthodoxy when it's around siloed approach to our industry, and really enable us all to get nature positive and have an emphasis on biodiversity and nature restoration as well. What I found quite positive earlier this year is the government released the Dasgupta report, which is written by economists and essentially is a business case of biodiversity. So how can we as industry really get behind that and understand the role that sustainable forestry has to play in aligning under a collective future? And I think the only other thing that I can focus upon here in terms of the collaboration is that this is a connected discussion with others in our fashion economy, in our fashion ecosystem, especially government, to establish the right business conditions to enable businesses to flourish, essentially. So what are the new policy regulations that need to come into play? What are the right business incentives that need to be made in order for UK fashion to continue to be part of the £34 billion GDP contribution we make to the British economy? That's a huge amount, but we need to work out the way that we can continue to enable our economy to flourish, especially that there's so many different in our industry.
It's great to hear from organizations such as you and Leonie with UNEC that are also at the forefront of guiding the industry towards net zero goals. So one of the other areas, as you mentioned, education, one of the other areas that the IPF is supporting the industries through empowerment with industry materials. And the IPF has developed a great resource that brands can refer to. So could you tell us a little bit more about this resource and other initiatives by the IPF, which are affecting positive environmental impacts and can also contribute to the industry's carbon footprint goals?
Yeah, of course. So that resource you mentioned is, we called it the Global Initiatives Map. It's on the Institute of Positive Fashion website, and I guess it was born out of the need and the mantra that we have is no duplication for our industry. It reduces efficiency and it keeps us away from actual outcomes for our industry that's needed. If we're thinking about a 2030 timeline, let alone 2050, then we really need to take much more concerted effort as an industry to align on what's happening, what others are doing. So we wanted to create something that enabled the industry to come to one place where we can see what are those initiatives that are happening at the moment elsewhere in the world. It's a central repository of toolkits and organizations and industry resources. We invite everybody to please have a look at it. And if you would like to be featured on it, then there's an email address on our website and we can try to upload those toolkits as well, because there's so much confusion around what to do, and it suddenly feels like there's not a lot of time to really take concerted action, especially if you're a business, if you're a small business and you're doing absolutely everything, from just keeping afloat, especially in a time of the pandemic where our industry has been upended in so many ways. But also as a designer, if you're thinking about business operations and you're actually thinking about the creative side of your business and creating new designs and new collections, then how can we as industry bodies and all of those of us on this panel really help guide those smaller businesses, which are often one or two people, in the right direction? So we're hoping that these toolkits can help play a role in demystifying what's out there as well. And more widely, we've launched our inaugural report from the Institute of Positive Fashion last week, and that's the Circular Fashion Ecosystem project. Very thrilled about that. It's what we're calling our blueprint for change when it comes to the industry, and it really outlines 3 target outcomes, 10 priority action areas, and 30 recommendations. But the key thing is those recommendations and those priority actions are outlined for 13 stakeholders. So all of the ones Leonie mentioned earlier as well, and we're talking about academia, brands, government, the role that collectors, reprocessors have to play, the roles of non-government organizations as well, and how we can all play a role in concert with each other to really get to some of those key goals. And those goals are ultimately, we need to produce less. We need to make significant shifts in the way that we do things as a business. We need to decouple business growth from resource extraction and virgin uptake, and that's the key thing. So it's really, how do we best embrace these agendas together? And we feel that definitely the circular economy is a way to start that transition and start those bold moves. The emphasis on regenerative and restorative systems by nature, and how the circular economy can play a role in taking us into that future. And when we're looking at some targeted solutions to deliver accelerated impact, we've also tried in the report to give some case studies around where this is already happening in the world. And one of the ones we included is the New Cotton Project that is coming out of Fashion for Good, and that's where they're producing cotton-like fibers made from cellulosic post-consumer waste textiles. So it's hugely exciting when we think about the innovation coming out of our industry. We're really at the intersection of innovation, creativity, technology. And when we think about fashion in that context, then the way that it resonates with consumers as well is very exciting. So I think we have a significant role to play when it comes to influencing the role of citizens and the public when it comes to understanding the power of change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shelja. And I will move on now to Joelle with the SAC. So Joelle, what role do low impact fibers, in particular man-made cellulosic fibers, play in the decarbonization of the fashion industry, and how can the Higg Index support that? Also would love to hear a little more on how the footprint has evolved as well.
Yeah, great. So I think man-made cellulosics as a material category are a really significant player in the fashion industry. They're one of the largest material categories. If we group man-made cellulosics together, the only fiber types actually that are larger in share are cotton and polyester. And really, if we're going to decarbonize our industry, we need to see all these fibers, especially the ones that have the largest use, reducing their impact. I think one of the places where man-made cellulosics is also particularly well positioned is in the ability to grow and take over potentially some market share from, as we look to say, okay, well, if we are reducing plastics, what's going to replace that? And if you do a volume analysis, if we wanted to look at like replacing all plastic with cotton, you'd somehow need to find either 2.8 times the land area or 2.8 times the yield improvements. It's going to be very hard to do that. Where man-made cellulosics, yes, it would be a 10 times larger area than currently is used to produce man-made cellulosics, which is large, right? That's 1,000 times growth in the industry. But at the same time, given the smaller side of man-made cellulosic pulp compared to other pulp, there's potentially a little bit more room to have that type of growth within the current constraints of the natural world. One of the big challenges in any of these switches, and certainly recognizing that decarbonization is only one of the environmental impacts that we need to manage, and that's just on the environment side, not even including the social and economic challenges that all are tied together, and we need to somehow move on all these at the same time. But one of the big challenges is the credible and consistent data, and this was touched on earlier in terms of greenwashing. There's a lot of claims out there that are partially true or anecdotal, or are true as long as you're only looking at a separate side of the boundary that doesn't take the full picture into account. And this is still also true of life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment is a framework, but without a consistent methodology and database, it's very hard to draw meaningful conclusions. And so this is where we see the HIG MSI fit in. The Material Sustainability Index is being able to provide that consistent methodology and say, how do different fibers stack up in a consistent way, and recognizing that it's not just about carbon, it's about water pollution. There's all these other elements that come in too. Footprint evolution of man-made cellulosics. So one of the, I think, really encouraging things that we've seen is that there's a high level of transparency with leading manufacturers to provide LCA data to help make those decisions. There's many different fibers that can be produced within a man-made cellulosic category. It's not just one thing, and being able to say, well, how do I know what are the best lower impact options within that portfolio? Life cycle assessment, again, is one of the tools to do that on the environment side, especially on the carbon side. So by having producers provide high quality LCA data, you can start to see some of the trade-offs or advantages of different fibers, even within a specific performance portfolio. And lastly, I mean, how we're going to get there, I think, with man-made cellulosics, it's twofold. There's obviously the manufacturing processes themselves and how that can be optimized, but feedstocks are going to be an important piece of that.
Yeah, well, that actually leads to my next question, which is there any vision for the SAC to expand the HIG index methodologies to include feedstock harvesting and extraction stage?
Yeah, so the current HIG MSI does include feedstock harvesting as part of the fiber footprint. So anything in the HIG MSI includes the extraction or feedstock harvesting. It's right cradle to gate in the LCA term there. But again, it's integrated into that fiber level because that's ultimately where a lot of the sourcing decisions are made. Where what we don't have is the generic man-made cellulosic fibers with different feedstocks, and part of that is because the feedstock is only part of the impact, and ultimately we want to see the full manufacturing footprint, and that requires primary data from the manufacturing side as well, but also the challenge of verification. I think this is where certifications like PEFC play a role, and I think open the door to say, okay, if we have generic viscose fiber as an example, or lyocell fiber, and we do have different certified feedstock options, what does that mean even if you don't have the full manufacturing footprint? So there's definitely a door there to do that, but it is a challenge to make sure that it is consistent with the existing LCA data in the tool. That's probably one of the biggest challenges with LCA and just the data that's out there is ensuring that it is consistent, that the decisions made are actually because of underlying sourcing or manufacturing processes and not due to assumptions into the data. So yes, I think we may see some options in the MSI in the future that split the generic options into different feedstock sources. But what we really want to see is the manufacturers providing that primary data of the fibers that they're producing, and that includes the specific feedstocks that they're using. So if they're using a low impact feedstock within that fiber mix, that is reflected in the Higg MSI already.
Okay, thank you so much, Joel. And Andres, over to you. So Mango has committed to sourcing responsible fabrics within the next decade. And can you share with us how Mango approaches the sourcing of forest-based fibers in your sustainability strategy?
Yes. So in terms of cellulosics, we set our target 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, with our time horizon of 2030. So we're really looking forward to be able to make sure that all of our cellulosic fibers are sustainably sourced by 2030. That means that they are that we know for sure that they are coming from certified origins, and pretty much everything that we're sourcing in that regard comes from either lensing certifications, a lensing company, or PFC or FSC certifications. We are slightly ahead of schedule on that, so that's good news. We are, as of today, almost 60% of the cellulosics that we are sourcing already are coming from controlled origins. So that's good news, because that's actually forcing us to speed up our efforts and push the boundaries a bit further. So we are revisiting our targets and trying to come up with a bit of a more ambitious and all-encompassing target regarding the fibers that we're sourcing. That's going to go pretty much for 2030 as well.
That's great news, Andres. It looks like you're a great example to the industry as well. So thank you for sharing that. I just had one more question as well. I think it's sometimes overlooked that besides fiber, brands can actually make a significant impact by changing their packaging, especially with the increase of e-commerce. And Mango has already taken some great steps towards sustainable packaging. So maybe you could tell me a little bit more about that commitment and the journey.
Sure. Yeah, well, the first thing we tackled was the carton boxes that we use to ship our goods from production places to our distribution center. So we were, back in the day, we were using all sorts of different boxes and with no traceability whatsoever. So we have worked a unified option of carton box that is coming from one single company that's actually managing the production and distribution of these carton boxes across all of our supply chain. And so we know exactly where those carton boxes are coming from, and they are, of course, certified cardboard. It's not fully deployed yet. We are going country by country, but we are progressing at good speed. And the other big point, which is a bit more tricky one, is we took the decision to change, substitute our plastic polybags where the garments are packed when they go inside these boxes. We took the decision to substitute that with paper bags. And of course, it's paper coming from certified origins as well. It's either PFC or FSC. And that's quite a tricky thing. It's not something you can do overnight. But we took that decision based on the fact that, well, there's a lot of plastic that we're putting on the market when we are producing so many pieces. We're talking about only for the folded garments around 150 or 160 million pieces every year. That means 160 million plastic bags, put on either the people's houses via online or either in the shops. That's quite it's still, I think we all know that still poses a bit of a challenge when it comes to recycling. We all know that all these plastic bags, many of them will end up in the wrong place or in the wrong trash can or in either eventually in the landfill. So we took this decision. We've switched to paper. I think it makes things so much easier for everybody to just put all these, it's basically waste, put that waste where it has to be, and make recycling easy for everybody.
Okay. This has been So much great information, and we are coming slowly to the end, and I haven't wanted to miss any of the information. So we've really covered so much. And before we close and share some of the takeaways that we heard from our wonderful panel today, can you tell me in 1 minute each your thoughts on how the fashion community can unlock forest potential to mitigate climate change? Anything that you might not have been able to share yet, or just to recap what we heard today. I'll go through the same order as before. So Leonie?
Yes, 1 minute is a challenge, but I'll try. I think just the main messages. Well, probably the most important way to do so is actually indirectly, so supporting forest potential to mitigate climate change through tackling emissions occurring along the value chain. So we know that climate change has already negative effects on forests. Although there's uncertainty, we know it's not going to, improve the state of forests in the future. So I think that is probably something like really drastic emissions reductions is something that just need to happen if we want to stay within 1.5 degrees anyways. And there's a lot of good work already ongoing through the UNFCCC Fashion Charter for Climate Action. I know a lot of brands part of that, and trying to shift to 100% renewable energy in manufacturing, eliminating coal in textile mills and manufacturing facilities and so on. So I think that's super important work ongoing. Another important aspect is to consider all the services that forests provide holistically. I mentioned it already, but I just want to stress, if we think about the fact that around 1.6 billion people depend on forests for timber, food, fuel, jobs, shelter, and 75% of our fresh water comes from forest watershed areas, it's just too important not to consider that, in any management decisions, in any climate agendas. And I think the UNFCCC, so the climate change, UN climate change, they have a mitigation hierarchy, which is to firstly avoid, secondly reduce in line with science, and thirdly compensate. And I think that's really what brands, but also the wider community should be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anna.
Well, our proposal is that we believe that PFC certification helps fashion brands and retailers make a responsible procurement, make their choices, and they can support sustainable forest management of forests around the world. And we propose it with our latter campaign, Fashion Forest Stay, by 5-step approach. And it's by engaging with us, with PFC team. We are all over around the world, so you can contact us. We have our headquarters in Geneva and the rest of countries, 49 countries. That will be the first. And second, to develop a responsible sourcing policy from wood-based fibers and other wood-based materials, for clothing to packaging. It's very important, for instance, for e-commerce, that last mile and so on, this kind of packaging we need for e-commerce. Then also map your supply chain, keep your and take care of your suppliers, and don't let them behind, but help them to raise the bar and try to do it better, more sustainably. Also, the fourth thing will be increase your sourcing of wood-based products from sustainably managed forests. Please, sustainable is a word too much used, but it has meaning. We should not empty this word of meaning. So please, we have, this is an ambitious target, and will be to achieve 100% of sourcing of certified forests. And then last but not least, collaborate with PFC and our global network. We are all, as I said before, all over the world, and we will be delighted of contacting you and speaking more about sustainability, fashion, and circular economy, and forest, and people and forest. So that will be our proposal.
Thank you, Anna. And Shelja, your thoughts on how the fashion community can work with forest potential to mitigate climate change?
Yeah, so great question. I'll try and keep it brief in two aspects. So the collaboration piece as well. I think increasingly everybody, as I mentioned earlier, no one actor can really do the change that we need to see in a short amount of time we need to see it in. We can't do it alone. So reach out to anybody on this call. And yeah, I think there will be open arms to understand how we can tackle things together. And that's, I guess, from a business perspective. The other is how can we educate and empower the public? Again, I think there's so much that we can do by way of storytelling and really help to accelerate what's needed when it comes to the consumer and citizens as well. We as an industry have such a unique relationship with the public. How can we leverage that in the right way through storytelling, connecting the public back to the emotional connection of their clothing, of textiles, and doing so through this beautiful story of our forests and nature.
Thank you, Sheldra. Joelle, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think transparency and standardization is a big piece of it. Being able to have a conversation all the way down the supply chain, understanding the impacts along the way and how they're being mitigated and adapted is important. Part of that is the sourcing practices that go with that, the purchasing practices, and making sure that they are not just in, if you're a brand in your interest of driving costs lower and lower through the supply chain, it really needs to be a partnership if we're going to move on these things. And that is a critical piece of it. And I think the last thing is ultimately, we need to also start with reductions, thinking of how we reduce the amount of clothing overall. It's, or at least the primary extraction. I think there's, of course, much bigger role for circular economy to play in that. How do you keep kind of the level of clothing that we have circulating, but in a reduced impact way? Because even with the best, lowest impact raw materials, there's still impact there, and we need to get to a much lower impact. And the only way we're going to do that is with coupling that with reductions of volume of production.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Andres.
Yeah, I think data is key. So Joel will agree with me. And as Leonie said at the beginning of the session, there's so many misleading statements, or so many different things affecting what we do or what brands do. You have to really be sure of what is that you're doing that it's actually working and it's actually contributing to this change. So I think. And for example, like with carbon emissions, and I think some brands or some companies are more advanced than others, but more or less everybody is working on having a good set of science-based targets to define strategies for carbon reduction. I think the same would apply for our biodiversity strategies. So we should really get our hands into good science-based targets for nature, and do a lot of number crunching on that, so that you can actually change your sourcing strategies, so that you can apply changes and probably take some sourcing off some places where there's more environmental risk, and put that where it actually is better, or it's always based on the data, right? So I think that would be my answer.
Wonderful. So thank you again to our panel who shared some very relevant insights with us today about how we can reduce the industry's carbon footprint and move towards achieving net zero. So just to recap, some of the key points mentioned today were the importance of collaboration between actors and sharing resources, and also ensuring that SMEs are not left behind. We also talked about business as usual not being enough, and words being followed by action, countering greenwashing, having a sound strategy. So following on that, data-based decision-making, considering a product's footprint, connecting different factors, including impact on the ground, and also transparency. Also, brands need tools to make informed decisions, and certification can be part of the solution. Ensuring a holistic view is taken in climate change mitigation, including social and environmental impacts, and incorporating this into sourcing decisions. and the importance of trees as a vital resource for carbon storage and mitigation, which can be secured and protected through sustainable forest management, certification, and policy. So in closing, we would like to invite you to contact Julia and myself for more information on how we can support your sustainability goals for forest-based products and work together to make a positive impact for forests and our industry. So just a little piece of information, the webinar will be available online for 2 weeks if you'd like to rewatch, or if any of your colleagues would be interested to see it as well. And we are very much within time. So thank you again to our panel, the audience, and I wish all of you a wonderful rest of the day and look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you again, panel. It was so insightful and interesting, and I'm sure our audience feels the same. Thank you so much, all of you.